Let's talk about chapter 1. Unveiling of Aunt Lydia's statue. I think this scene is going to be in the finale. After the speech she gave about the men being godless, I think they're going to use the commander's death as a strike down from God. And I think they will honor Aunt Lydia and her mission to ending godless men. That's what's going to get this statue built. Imagine Aunt Lydia staring up at her statue, not knowing if it's a reward or a threat to keep her in her place. She says only dead people are allowed to have statues, but she's been given one while still alive. She's petrified. I was trying to imagine what her statue would look like. Lydia's in the middle. The left hand, she's holding a little girl. The right hand, it's resting on a handmaid, and behind her is a pearl girl. It's hard to say pearl girl. Aunt Lydia referred to her taser as a reminder of her failings. She says if she was more effective, she would only need her words. Well, yeah, but you were shocking people like cows. How long it took you to figure that one out? And then there's a time skip. And there's bird poop all over it and it's weathered down. But it kind of becomes a shrine. People start leaving eggs and oranges. Eggs for fertility, oranges for pregnancy. After Aunt Lydia is like talking directly to the reader and breaking that fourth wall. It reminds me of this scratching. Don't let the bastards grind you down. First off-red wrote it down knowing that there might be another off-red after her. Knowing that she might get in trouble. And she wrote it in Latin. I love that Aunt Lydia is writing down words that could be incriminating or could be liberating. What did you guys think of chapter 1? I know it's only like 3-4 pages. I thought it was the perfect way to kick off this story. Welcome to the first episode of my TikTok book club. Let's talk about chapter 2, Precious Flower. Hannah's POV. This chapter is heartbreaking. Hannah's mom retells the story of her kidnapping, but phrases it like a magical fairy tale. Hannah's basically asking her where she comes from, and you expect that she's gonna get some version of the birds and bees talk, but instead she tells her the magic ring story. She has a magical ring that was able to grant her just one wish, and she used that wish on her. What's that magic ring? A wedding ring, of course. Cute, right? Wrong. Here's where it gets sick and fucking twisted. It says that the magic ring guided a light into the forest. She led her out of the forest and into the safe kingdom. No one could hurt her again. What magical forest was that? Oh, the forest on her way to Canada when she got kidnapped by the guardians and eyes. That's the magical forest. And that magical kingdom she was protected in is her cage. Gilead. She literally rebranded kidnapping into a fairy tale. Hannah was so young, she barely remembers getting kidnapped. She remembers being in the forest and holding someone's hand, and that's enough for her mother, Tabitha, to switch the story around, take out certain details and put new ones in instead. Margaret, you are hurting me, Margaret. I didn't even get into why this chapter is called Precious Flower. I don't know what sex is. There's no sex ed. All they're taught is that they have invaluable treasure that existed unseen inside them. Its petals tore off if a man would be indulged. They don't even know what indulged means, but they're scared. Aunt Vidala is scaring the bejesus out of the girls. But luckily, Hannah has Aunt Esty, right? That's her name? Esty. Aunt Esty teaches them that sex could be enjoyable between husbands and wives, but it's not retaining to the girls. They're just thinking about flowers being plucked apart. That's what they think sex is. And I mean, that's like a step below my sex ed, so it's like, it's not that far. Anyways, what did you guys think of this chapter? Magic ring story stuck with me. It was breaking my heart. My poor little heart. What are the girls of Gilead learning in school if they're not allowed to read and write? Here's what chapter 2 tells us. The girls are basically divided into 2 classes. Upper class were daughters of commanders and sons of Jacob. Lower class were daughters of the Okano people. Daughters of commanders learned wifely duties and womanly hobbies like embroidery or flower arranging, painting. They also learned how to do things like how to order your Martha around to make sure that she doesn't burn any of your food. The Okano people weren't issued Marthas or handmaids, so they had to pick up the role of all. Kind of like what I'm wearing. Oh no, I'm me being an Okano wife. I promise you I did not plan this. Nonetheless, the daughters of the lower class learned how to cook, clean, knit to make their own clothes. And on top of all that, they technically have to be the handmaid too and make a child. So who went where? The children that were kidnapped from their original parents were put in adoption centers where wives would browse around, treating them like furniture to pick out which was their favorite. Hannah was most likely adopted out of one of these centers. And remember, the kids that were in these centers, that's the same kids that June got out on the plane. Since the Okano people come from a lower class, all their children are biological. What happens if an Okano wife isn't fertile? Be sure it's off to the colonies with you. You have to be fertile. Correct me if I'm wrong though. Tell me what you thought of this chapter, and if you're reading along with us, I'll be back next week to talk about chapters 3, 4, and 5. Read along with us in the book club. Gilead Barbie Dream House. Do you remember the doll that Hannah was holding in season 4? Here's how chapter 3 describes it. Meant to replicate a typical Gilead household. It has every room and every doll for every role. It had a kitchen with 3 Martha dolls, Vera, Rose, and Zilla. They didn't have last names, but they had a wife doll that had to order the Martha doll around. The commander doll stayed in the office to do business work. Hannah was never allowed in there. She didn't know what business that was. The toy office was filled with many books that had no words on them. This would give Hannah this weird feeling. But Tabitha would tell her, because women weren't allowed to read, books are just for decoration, like vases are for flowers. The house even had a powder room, but women aren't allowed to wear makeup anymore. Hannah doesn't even know what that is. A driver doll to drive them around, and the angel dolls to protect them. It wouldn't be a Gilead dream house without a handmaid doll, and not just any handmaid doll, but a pregnant one. But you know who's not a part of the Gilead household? Aunts. Aunts all lived in a dormitory across town. They weren't allowed to have houses of their own. Hannah would lock her Martha doll underneath the house and pretend that it was banging out crying for help. She's just like her aunt for real, because Moira definitely did lock an aunt in a basement. These Gilead dream houses were created so that little girls could insert themselves into this world. Of course, Hannah was scared of June when she was in that box. That was her first time interacting with a handmaid, and she was previously told not to talk to them. I think by putting her in this box, she felt just as trapped as the dolls in her dollhouse. The Gilead indoctrination starts early. They put it in the toys. Remember the scene with June and Hannah making pancakes? Well, in the book, Hannah's not even allowed to learn a recipe. Here's what we learned in chapter 4. While her mother was resting, it was not resting, and it was not in peace. Hannah would spend a lot of time with her Marthas. She would constantly ask to learn a new recipe, and the older she got, the more they told her no, because Hannah was growing up to be a wife, not any kind of wife. The few skills that women were allotted to have started to act as social currency. A wife's only duty is to be her husband's trophy. I mean, she shouldn't have calluses on her hands from cooking and cleaning. Wives took great pride in having so much money and power that they can delegate to others, creating an extension of themselves. And this ultimately creates resentment between the wives and the wives. Eden looked up to Serena. She connected more with Rita because she knew how to cook and clean, but she looked up to Serena and wanted to be more like her. Martyrs tend to grow resentful of wives that overstep their role. If a wife cooked and cleaned, it would make no use for the Martha. If you're reading along in the book club, let me know what you thought of this chapter. I'll be back next week to talk about chapter 5. If you read ahead, you know what's in that one. The Martha network is still alive and well. Here's what we learned in chapter 5. Rumors are the currency, and a bad enough rumor can sink the highest of families. Owning a Martha was like owning a luxury item. So the more Marthas you had, the more money and power you had too. Since Hannah's commander family had 3 Marthas, she became pretty popular. Hannah, Shunamete, Becca. Shunamete is a commander's daughter. Her family has 1 Martha. She's trying to be besties with Hannah since Hannah has the most Martha clout, takes a lot of pride in her status, and loves to bully people below her. Becca comes from an Icona family. She doesn't have a Martha, but because her dad is a dentist and the best dentist in town, she gets to go to wife school with all the other commander daughters. But she gets bullied there because she doesn't have the same status. Shunamete can't even remember her Martha's name even though she has 1. Her excuse being, how should I know? They're all just Marthas. This reminds me of the speech that Rita gave where she says that she was given a serial number and no last name. And even though Hannah has 3 Marthas, she remembers the name of all of them. Rosa, Vera, and Zilla. Through this Martha communication network, Hannah hears the news about Tabitha. Tabitha wasn't resting. She was dying. Word got around town, and Hannah was the last person to know. When she confronted her Marthas about it, they said they thought someone had told her, but she was the last person to find out. 2 days later after finding out, Tabitha died. If you're reading along in the book club, let me know what you thought of this chapter and... Ooh, not a disappearance. June smuggling out Nicole and those plane full of kids was seen as Gilead's terrorist attack. And here's what we learned in chapter 6. Remember the campaign that Fred and Serena went on to port Nicole from Canada and bring her back to Gilead? Well, it's still happening. Nicole's used as a propaganda device. Her face is plastered all over Gilead to inspire nationalism for Gilead, xenophobia for other countries, and turning Gilead into a victim. It's Eastern Gilead, but instead of praying for the return of Christ, they're praying for the return of baby Nicole, even though she's literally not a baby anymore. Here's the prayer that they recite. They bless the wives, the aunts, the daughters, and pray for the handmaids to be washed of their sins through their sacrifice of the ceremony. But then it goes, bless baby Nicole, who was stolen from her treacherous handmaid mother into godless Canada. Bless all the innocents that she represents, aka the plane full of kids that June also set free. They end this prayer saying this Latin phrase. I'm not gonna try to say it. Aunt Lydia invented these hymns and prayers as a control tactic. It framed Mayday as a terrorist group to install fear in Gilead residents, bonded over the trauma, and saw themselves as victims. It wasn't xenophobic to hate other countries, but a victim response. And if they saw themselves as victims, then they would justify all the wars. Despite all this, Aunt Lydia claims to be a double agent. Lydia hides her double agent testimony in the most dangerous place for a woman, the library. I'll explain more in part 2. But if you're reading along in the book club, let me know what you thought of this chapter. Aunt Lydia claims to be a double agent, secretly building her testimony against Gilead. Let's see what chapter 6 has to say. Lydia hides her written testimony in the most dangerous place for a woman, the library. There's a secret, exclusive library filled with forbidden books, meant for only high-ranking aunts. To get there, she has to travel past the bloodline genealogy archive, which is like a giant family tree keeping track of all the different families, tracking both real bloodlines and new ones, to prevent incest and creating unbabies. Past there to the forbidden books section. Books like Jane Eyre and Paradise Lost, too radical for women to read, so only the highest ranking could handle something like this. Even the Bible was kept under lock and key in fear that it would radicalize someone to break free from Gilead. So Aunt Lydia keeps her testimony in the most forbidden, X-rated book, The Defense of One's Life. Written by Cardinal Newman, he was a leader of the Oxford movement, which was a Christian movement where he left the Church of England and converted to be Catholic. In his biography, he provides testimony speaking on why he felt convicted to return to Catholic faith and leave the Church of England. Being Catholic is seen as heretic in Gilead. So Aunt Lydia keeps her testimony against Gilead here. If anyone found it and tried to expose her, they would also be exposing themselves by reading this book in the first place. And if you're reading along with us in the book club, tell me what you thought of this chapter, and do you think Aunt Lydia is ready for change? In Gilead, in order to be an aunt, you had to prove yourself as a pearl girl. Here's what chapters 7 and 8 tell us. Personally, I love Daisy's chapters because they give so much insight on how Canada is reacting to Gilead. Daisy grew up in Canada with her 2 foster parents, and they all work at a thrift store where these pearl girls would come and hand out brochures. They would say anything from bring baby Nicole back to Gilead to Gilead saves women, there's no rape in Gilead. You sure about that? Pearl girls are basically missionaries for Gilead. After 9 years of training, aunts in training are trusted to be pearl girls. The idea is they work as missionaries going to foreign countries, like Canada, to recruit a pearl, and capturing that pearl and bringing her back to Gilead. And it actually works sometimes. They played on people who were homeless, people who were addicted to drugs, people who were in domestic violence relationships, promising them a safe space, a place to sleep, a place to get clean. Spoiler alert if you haven't read past this chapter. They always traveled in twos and were taught to look out for each other and against each other. Pearl girls get perks. They're encouraged to be tempted and then reject temptation and choose Gilead. Aunts are allowed to read and write, and they don't have to get married or forced to have children. In Gilead, there's only so many rules a woman can fit into. I'm not surprised people chose to be a pearl girl. And if you're reading along in the book club, let me know what you thought of chapters 7 and 8. In the books, baby Nicole doesn't know she's baby Nicole. She grew up with foster parents under a fake name and birth date. We're on chapter 11. Everything she knows about baby Nicole, she learned from either school or TV. Both Gilead and Mayday uses the face for political advantage. For Gilead, baby Nicole represented that they were a victim too. For Mayday, baby Nicole represented liberation. Watched a documentary in school that baby Nicole was smuggled out by her mother, who was a handmaid. Her father was a top commander. So the public story was that Fred was the father, not Nick. So under Gilead law, Nicole was property of Gilead, and a commander was her legal parent. Gilead accused Canada of abating kidnappers, and Canada was forced to comply. By the time that they actually complied, she was moved to a new home. She was raised by 2 foster parents, my headcanon, Janine and Luke. In the books, their name is Neil and Melanie. Melanie sings show tunes and is really colorful. Hello, Janine. Neil is described as good with numbers and machinery. Hello, Mr. Bomb Squad over here. Having grown up in a world where Gilead already exists, she always kind of suspected that her parents weren't always her parents, acted like helicopter parents. Same time of being helicopter parents, they also never took pictures of her and wasn't sentimental in that way. And unfortunately, she learned the real reason that they were always so overprotective of her on her 16th birthday when they died in a terrorist attack. That day, she learned her true identity. She's Nicole, baby Nicole. If you're reading along in the book club, let me know what you thought of this chapter. When the sons of Jacob took over, they had a flowchart checklist with everyone's name on it, whether you would become an econowife, martha, or handmaid. And then they would shove you into an unmarked van to the high school, box store, or stadium. Let's see where you would fall. Chapter 12. Van. The high school is where they taught women to be handmaids. The box store is exactly what it sounds like. A store where they paraded women to be econowives. And the football stadium is where they tortured the aunts to be. So how do they decide who goes where? If you committed a sin that's on public record, I'm talking having a fetus deleted, having a divorce, or who's been on birth control. When the sons of Jacob took over, they had access to all medical records. If you didn't have any of that on public record, you're most likely sent to the box store. Think of the Red District in Amsterdam, but for marriage. If you were past your fertile windows, middle-aged, and highly educated, I'm talking PhDs, law degrees, they targeted them. Highly educated women was their number one threat. So you are either with them or taken out. They only showed Aunt Lydia being a teacher in the show, but that's only a small part of her history. She was only a school teacher for 2 terms. Aunt Lydia was a patriotic feminist. She spent most of her career being a family court judge, and she even spent time volunteering at a crisis grape center. She's had a divorce before. She's had a fetus deleted before. But she was still chosen to go to the stadium because of her experience controlling family dynamics and dealing with distressed women. That could come in handy for Gilead. They had their list, they checked it twice to see if you've been naughty or nice. Where would you go? The sons of Jacob was like if all the incel podcast bros out there formed a coup to take over the country. We're still in chapter 12. The first time Aunt Lydia saw the sons of Jacob was when they were barging into her courts to arrest her. She described the younger ones as impressionable, overly violent, and telling a bunch of misogynistic jokes where women is the punchline. She described the older sons of Jacob as these jaded middle-aged men with receding hairlines and no light behind their eyes. They held the puppet strings to the younger sons. These older sons preyed on weaker, insecure men that felt like the world was against them and fueled this insecurity, blaming it on women. If women were home cooking and cleaning and taking care of their kids, then you would have a job. So when the sons of Jacob gave them a job, gave them power, they pledged their undying loyalty. Even if they didn't agree with all of their values, they never spoke up or protested out of fear of losing their new social class. If we don't foster welcoming spaces for young lost men, the wrong people might create a safe space for them. Gilead is the safest space for incel weak men. Hannah gets an evil stepmother, Paula. We're in chapter 13. In Gilead, the only way out of your marriage is to become a widow. After Tabitha dies, Commander Kyle remarries another widow, Paula. Paula's husband was found dead in his study with his pants pulled down. Obviously, the main suspect was the handmaid that was found down the block trying to escape with the map. If that sounds like a perfect crime, that's because it was made to. Paula killed her husband herself. She pretended to be an ally to the handmaid and gave her a fake map, telling her that she was helping her escape. But when the handmaid got lost, because she was using a fake map, she was caught and made the obvious suspect. Paula set her up. The aunts knew all along and let them get away with it. A wife killing her husband in Gilead is bad press. A handmaid killing their commander happened. Instead of punishing her, Aunt Lydia holds this information against her as blackmail. Hannah's only way out is to become an aunt. Paula nearly refuses to give her permission until Aunt Lydia reminds her. Aunts are always watching, never forgetting the real truth. She never really got away with the crime. Aunts will hold this information over her forever. In wife school, aunts teach their daughters the concubine story. Chapter 14. A traveler's concubine, aka their handmaid, ran away from them back home to their father. So the traveler went to their father's house to get them again. The father willingly gave his daughter up again to be the traveler's concubine. While the traveler and concubine travel once more, they are faced with an angry mob that threatens to rape them. The coward traveler pushes the concubine into the angry mob, sacrificing her. The angry mob ended up raping and killing her. The aunts use this lesson to scare the women into submission. They frame escaping as a dangerous, selfish act that could end up with more people being hurt than you intended, to brainwash them. The story never sat right with Hannah. When Hannah finally becomes an aunt, she's able to read the unredacted Bible and learn the true story. The concubine was avenged. The real story ends with the concubine getting cut into 12 pieces, each piece being sent to each tribe, declaring war based on how the concubine was treated. The tribe responsible for the murder ended up being obliterated. Any survivors were banned from marrying or making new children. Hannah learns that Gilead isn't Christian. They're using Christianity for their own evil agenda. Hannah doesn't let Gilead get in the way of her own personal faith. By reading the Bible on her own, Hannah is able to find a version of her spirituality for herself, separating God from Gilead. In Gilead, getting your period meant that you were turning into a woman, and Hannah's about to get hers. Hannah describes the adult female body as one big booby trap, pun intended, remarking that if a woman had a hole, something is bound to get shoved in it, and then something is bound to get shoved right back out. If you weren't a Martha or an aunt, you had to at least try to have kids. There was no other purpose for women in Gilead. They were taught that they had different brains than men. Males were hard and focused. Girl brains were soft and mushy because women aren't distracting themselves with things like learning. They have more space in their brain to be caretakers. Daughters were taught to welcome their period and blood itself as a part of life as a woman. Daughters were taught to be comfortable around blood and other bodily substances because women were meant to be caretakers of the young and elderly. And that's part of the reason why the handmaids wear all red. The blood red color represents their fertility. But the handmaids redefined it into becoming their war paint. It became their uniform, representing all the senseless blood that has been shed to make Gilead bleed. The daughters of Gilead were separated into two social classes: those born properly by commander and wife, and those born illegitimately, that are byproducts from the assistance of a handmaid. We're in chapter 15. And as much as aunts tried to market handmaids as essential service workers that are atoning for their sins, they were still regarded as glorified sluts. But the daughters of Gilead have zero sexual education, so they don't even know what a slut even is. To them, a slut is someone who has gone with someone's husband but doesn't have a husband of their own. I mean, they kind of right with that one, but they don't even know what gone with means. If anything, it can mean gone with the wind. After Tabitha dies, Hannah finally learns the real truth about who her real mother is. But once it comes out in school that Hannah's real mom was one of these slutty handmaids, her popularity plummeted. And at home, Commander Kyle and her evil new stepmother Paula received a handmaid of their own to replace her. Hannah didn't know much about handmaids. Children were taught to keep their distance because it was too hard on the handmaids to interact with children. We're in chapter 16. When Hannah turns 13, she learns that her real mother was a handmaid, and she becomes obsessed with learning anything she can about her. She was brainwashed all her life to believe that the memory that she had of running away in the forest was a dream. Hannah tried asking her Marthas if they knew anything about her, but all they could tell her is that if her mother was caught running away with her, she was most likely turned into a handmaid. And handmaids have no name, no way to tell them apart, and no homes. It would be basically impossible to reunite with her. So when Commander Kyle and Paula get a new handmaid of Kyle, who we later learn real name is Crystal, Hannah becomes obsessed with Crystal. Started to fantasize that of Kyle was her real mother. She would fantasize that of Kyle would look at her and recognize her, and they would be reunited, being rescued, even though she wasn't exactly sure what she was being rescued from. She tries sneaking into her room to find a glimpse of who she might have been before this, but just like her mother's room once was, all traces of the old Crystal was wiped clean. Only a chair, a table, and a lamp. There wasn't even a scratching in the wall. Finding her real mother in a sea of handmaids was like finding a needle in a haystack. Impossible. The most dangerous place in Gilead for a girl is alone with a man, and Hannah's about to go to the dentist. Chapter 17. Dr. Grove was the best dentist in Gilead, and although dentists were considered econo people, Dr. Grove was able to rise in status. His daughter Becca gets to go to wife school instead of econo wife school, and he's even allotted a handmaid. So when Dr. Grove essayed Hannah during her dentist appointment, she didn't know what to do but just sit there and wait for it to be over. Daughters aren't taught about consent. They're only told that men have these uncontrollable urges and that it's up to girls to ward them off. But Hannah knows what happens to girls that speak up against powerful men. They're either told that they were lying and get punished, or told that it was their fault and get punished. Hannah never felt more trapped and alone in this world. So Hannah went home and tried to pretend none of it happened. She was scared if someone like her stepmother found out, they could use that information against her. Hannah wasn't Dr. Grove's first victim, and she wasn't his last. But in later chapters, Aunt Lydia gets her lick back. Follow me to join the Book to Screen Club. Unmarried girls in Gilead weren't allowed to witness births. They had to wait until they were trapped into a marriage of their own to learn their own inevitable fate. We're in chapter 18. Hannah's home from school with her first period the same day that her family's handmaid goes into labor. She snuck up as close as possible and listened to the two opposing sounds. On one side, she could hear laughing and clinking. The wives are having a tea party and drinking champagne, happily celebrating the arrival of the baby. And then on the other side, she can hear a distant, yet indistinguishable, animalistic, almost guttural groaning, surrounded by a chorus of push, 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 breathe, breathe, breathe. You know the nonsense that they were doing. The greatest shame that a handmaid could bring to a family is living to give birth to an unbaby, a word that they use to describe a baby born with birth defects or disabilities. Gilead was far from pro-life. They were more like procreate a perfect white child. The greatest womanly honor a handmaid can make is sacrificing her own life for the baby. And by sacrificing, I mean that they cut open of Kyle while she was still awake and alive to get the baby out. They didn't even bother to try to save her life because she already did her job and was redeemed from her sins. Listening in on this birth scarred Hannah for life. It radicalized her to try to escape her inevitable fate. There's a reason why Gilead had tons of toys, games, and nursery rhymes that helped cement Gilead values into their kids. We're in chapter 19. Gilead snakes and ladders. Land on a prayer and you climb up the ladder tree of life. Land on a sin and you slide down the satanic snake. Gilead Barbie dream house with every doll for every role. Martha in the kitchen. A commander in his office. And a pregnant handmaid locked away. They even played with playing cards, but instead of letters, we had symbols. Kings were commanders, queens were wives, jacks were aunts. The aces was one giant eye looking down from the sky. Spades were angels, clubs were guardians. Diamonds were Marthas, hearts were handmaids. So instead of a king of hearts, you would have a commander of handmaids. The wall song. Who's that hanging from the wall? Fee, fi, fiddle, oh. It was a handmaid. What was she called? Fee, fi, fiddle, fo. She was here and now she's not. Fee, fiddle, fiddle, fo. We had a baby in the pot. And then they would smack their stomachs. Fee, fi, fiddle, fo. I know it sounds sinister even for kids. The kids are a product of their environment. And they'll make songs out of anything. Aunt Lydia and all the other aunts were tormented for 7 days straight. Chapter 20. When Gilead took over, their biggest threat was highly educated women. They were the only class of women capable of taking back the country. So they took all the highly educated women and brought them here to torment them 24/7. Let's go through this schedule. 10 a.m. they're dropped off and divided by professions. Lawyers over here, doctors over here. They were all forced to sit in the hot ass sun for hours. A couple of hours pass. Let's say 2 p.m. The sons of Jacob hands out water bottles. Seems like a mercy until they're told they're not allowed to go to the bathroom. They have to go on themselves. At 4 p.m., a man over the loudspeaker gives an announcement about how the divine eye sees all. And after all the sons of Jacob say amen, the show starts. Same way Aunt Lydia in this scene lines up all the handmaids. Aunt Lydia once saw 20 aunts-to-be getting led into the stadium and were told to pose like this, as if they're taking a picture. The sons of Jacob marched in and pew-pewed them all. They put on this show over and over and over. You either said yes to being an aunt or no to living. And this was just day 1. Come back for part 2 to learn what happens for the rest of the week. Nights were much worse. In the books, Grandma Holly does not raise baby Nicole. Mayday does. 2 Mayday agents, Neil and Melanie. After June smuggled baby Nicole out of the country, Gilead put pressure on Canada, accusing them of aiding kidnappers and threatened them with war. That sent citizens into a frenzy. Everyone started looking for baby Nicole. It was no longer safe to stay with Holly. She's given a new birthday, backstory, and even a new name, Daisy. She knows about baby Nicole from the media. Everyone in Canada does. Because for the following 16 years, Gilead makes a big point every year to say Gilead remembers their loss. But she doesn't learn that she's baby Nicole until her 16th birthday. Her fake parents, Neil and Melanie, are unalived by undercover Gilead agents. She was taken to a Quaker safe house. The Quakers were a group of Christians that resisted Gilead. They provided refugees with a place to sleep, change of clothes, and passports so Gilead could never find them again. Because the real Christians was not supporting Gilead. Nicole spent her 16th birthday eating cake by herself and mourning what she thought her life once was. How did Gilead turn the aunts against all the other women? Gilead wanted to segregate their society by gender, separate and certainly not equal. So they created a smaller hierarchy within the already oppressed class. Gilead rounded up all the highly educated women and tormented them 24/7. Tiny rations of food and water, clogged toilets, no toilet paper, no hygiene products, no soap. They had to use their hands. Closest thing they got to a shower was when it rained once. And yet, the aunts still stuck together. They sang rally songs, they gave each other advice. Aunt Lydia became friends with her co-worker, Anita. So they sat in their funk all day, watching the sons of Jacob eliminate woman after woman for saying no to complying. But then the show changed. Instead of men pew-pewing the women, it was other women that were just recruited, dressed in these brown sackcloths, did the same thing the sons of Jacob did. After that, there was no more kumbaya singing. They were all paranoid of what each other would do. On the 5th day, a woman tried to fight back. She turned her pew-pew to the sons of Jacob instead, but she didn't save anyone. She was immediately unalived. There was no rising up to save all women. It was every woman for themselves. The 7th day, Aunt Lydia and her friend Anita were separately taken to a commander. The commander asked them 3 questions. Are you thankful to be alive? Are you thankful to be born as a woman? And are you thankful enough to comply? If you said no, or they didn't believe you when you said yes, you were taken to the think tank for them to make you grateful. Follow me for more if you want to know what happens in a think tank. And if you're reading along in the book club, what did you think of this chapter? Gilead trained aunts with the think tank. Prison that's so terrible, you leave it feeling so thankful that you will comply with anything that Gilead tells you to do. I think Margaret Atwood was referencing 1984 and the Ministry of Love prisons when designing the think tank, because there's a lot of similarities. The think tank is a teeny tiny prison cell, no toilets, just a used bucket, no light, no cellmates, and no way to tell time pass except for how long your nails has grown. And she became so touch deprived that she let roaches crawl all over her face just so she could feel the touch of another living being. But just when she thought she was that touch deprived, she started getting surprise visits from the sons of Jacob where they would just kick her and tase her over and over. She would cry from her 2 eyes but kept her 3rd eye wide open. She plotted on how to get them back. After a certain amount of time, it could have been weeks, it could have been months, she is finally let out. She's taken to what seems like paradise, a clean hotel room. There's food, water, a soft bed. After all that she's been through, she literally falls to her knees and prays. She eats, showers, sleeps, but when she wakes up, her clothes has been replaced with the brown sackcloth. She had to make a choice. She would keep her 3rd eye open, always watching, always waiting for her moment to strike. She decided to be a double agent. What happens to teenage girls in Gilead? Chapter 25. Parents dealt with moody teenage girls by marrying them off to husbands practically or literally twice their age to basically be their new parent. Moody girls were matched with strict husbands to straighten them out. And some of these parents would try to make their prepubescent kids look older, stuff their bra and pad their hips to make them look like they were of childbearing age. Ages 13 to 15 was your prime fertile window in Gilead. By 18, you were considered dried goods. And I don't want to know what that would make me. I'm 26. The older girls got, the more the risk of falling in love with an unsuitable match became. Because in Gilead, marriage was based off of fertility and status, not love. But if you fell in love with an unsuitable match, or worse, lost your virginity to one, it would cost you your life. Eden drowned in her love. Eden was an econa girl. She was expected to want to rise in status and date someone like Nick, but she was just a teenage girl experiencing her first crush, which I guess is the most dangerous thing in Gilead. In Gilead, when a girl gets her period, she's visited by what I like to call the fairy god aunts of marriage. It's like the tooth fairy, but for your period. And instead of money, they bippity boppity boop you into a child bride. Chapters 26. These fairy god aunts of marriage would measure you, because you had to be about this tall to get married in Gilead. Some parents would even stuff and pad their little kids to look like they were going to puberty just so that they can marry them off earlier. If you met the minimum size for childbearing hips, you were ready to be a bride. America's Next Top Model style, they present love matches to the daughter, giving her an illusion of a choice. But really, it's up to her parents, and they always choose the richest and the oldest. Getting your first period was the end of your childhood and the beginning of womanhood. You were expected to stop going to girls' school, give up all your friends, all of your toys, and all of your pink clothes. They're given new spring green clothes, and they're enrolled in a new school, Ruby's Premarital Preparatory, where young girls study to be virtuous wives. If you enrolled in the fall, you were expected to have a ring by spring. A Ruby, between girl and wife in Gilead. Chapter 27. After young girls got their period and met the minimum childbearing hip measurements, they were enrolled in a new school, the Ruby's Premarital Preparatory, where they learned how to act as the head mistress of a household. I say act because that's what these little girls were doing, cosplaying the role of a happy wife. They had to learn the lines, memorize prayers and recipes because they weren't allowed to read them for reference. But some girls like Becca couldn't just act like a wife. She practically had stage fright, and no matter how hard she tried to just grin and bear it, she couldn't let the show go on. So when the girls had flower arranging class, she took her life into her own hands with her garden shears, leaving blood all over her flower arrangements, because the dentist that diddles kids was her dad. And Hannah watched and realizes that the same thing that happened to her at the dentist must have been happening to Becca all along. The other aunts called Becca an immature little girl. Succumbing to marriage was a part of growing up, and trying to fight against that was immature and childish. God forbid a teenage girl is childish. How do Marthas know how to cook if they can't read any recipes, measurements, or temperatures? Chapter 28. Some Marthas were classically trained, like Cora, but the wives were expected to know how to cook too, so that they could lead their Marthas with an iron fist, aka Serena gave Rena that backhand. Because if dinner gets burnt, when an ingredient goes bad, you're not eating that night. Food waste was a big no-no in Gilead. The supermarkets are not stocked. Gilead was going broke. By season 6, no countries want to trade with Gilead, and they rely on the unwomen in the colonies to farm produce for the rest of the country. Therefore, their tokens were tightly rationed. It's always in my headcanon that Marthas were trained in like this Gordon Ramsay-esque boot camp, but really learned how to cook just like how our ancestors did. Learning recipes from mouth to air, seasoning based off of feeling, not measurements, cooking mindfully with things like color and smell in mind rather than numbers. And if you forgot, you could always count on another Martha in the network to help you. I'm not gonna lie, once you learn how to cook mindfully, you don't really need recipes and measurements. Good 90% of the recipes I know are up here. I couldn't tell you the recipe if I tried. Why does Gilead have aunts but no uncles? Chapter 29. Gilead believed gender equality to be a cruel promise that went against nature. But it wasn't enough for men to believe that it was the natural order. Women had to believe it too and enforce it. So within the femisphere, aunts were at the top. Aunts are given a budget and a timeline to create uniforms, slogans, laws, and whatever else they needed to create high offspring numbers and low sin numbers. Aunt Lydia was able to use their misogyny against them, claiming that men had more important things to worry about, like war. They didn't need to micromanage the aunts. She negotiated a full segregation, the aunt hall. Her aunts would lead the women. Men could only enter in case of emergencies. They didn't need to micromanage their sex slaves too. Let women be women. And the men in charge hate women so much, they agree. As long as aunts can boost the numbers, no uncles necessary. Because believe it or not, the ceremony is the tamed version created by the aunts. I hate to imagine what the uncles had in mind in the first place. June spent 6 seasons trying to get her kids out of Gilead, just for Mayday to send her kid right back. Chapters 30 to 33. Both Gilead and Mayday were willing to put baby Nicole's life in danger to outsmart the other. After Daisy learns she's baby Nicole, Mayday starts pressuring her into thinking she's like the only one who could save America. With the worst plan in history, go back into Gilead. They never actually asked for her consent. They just kind of told her what she would be doing. What could go wrong? Mayday uses special spyware called the microdot. Tiny little camera that takes teeny little pictures. So teeny that you need a microscope to see them. Mayday had a special source. Who could it be? Said that only other way to deliver this teeny tiny microdot pictures to Canada was to send baby Nicole into Gilead, undercover as a Pearl, and be escorted by the Pearl girls. To confirm it's her, she has to get a tattoo that says, "Love God." The source will tattoo plant a microdot in the O that holds all the tea on Gilead. Take the country down once and for all. And then all she has to do is escape. How hard can it be? Her mom did it like 10 times. Aunts were the teachers at fiancé school that would teach these 13-year-old girls what to expect on their wedding night. They didn't get much detail. They knew something had to go in somewhere to get the baby in there, and then something had to happen for the baby to get out. Sex is not meant to be pleasurable, but a minor's sacrifice to make a baby. Periods aren't just your uterine line shedding, it's your body shedding off its childhood, preparing to be a wife and mother. Most of the girls didn't really learn what sex was until their night of their wedding. That was the best case scenario. Some girls knew too much, while the other girls would just theorize and imagine what sex would be like. Figuratively, Becca spoke literally. Becca, like a lot of the girls in Gilead, was SA'd from a young age by her own father, resulting in her developing a terrible case of phallophobia, the fear of the penetrative weapon that men wield between their legs. So when Becca's family arranged a marriage, she didn't have to wait to find out the truth. She took her life into her own hands and had a higher calling. She would herself and keep trying to herself over and over unless the aunts trained her to become an aunt, because aunts are the only class of women fully segregated from the other sex. When Hannah enters courting season, she has these fairy godmother aunts that arrange her marriage. Chapters 35 to 36. Because she's technically a commander's daughter, she has a choice. But Hannah's choices was 3 of the worst men of Gilead. Commander Judd ran through several wives and several handmaids, keeps marrying younger and younger. The other choice was a guy old enough to be her grandfather. And the youngest choice was a guy 25 years old. Even though she had choices, she didn't really have a choice. Her parents encouraged her to choose Commander Judd because he was the oldest and the most powerful. If Hannah played her cards right, she could be a widow before she turned 18. And widows were the only class of women that technically courted for love. First marriage was for power, second marriage was for love. Everyone in the house started pressuring her. Some parents would do anything to marry off their daughters, even going as far as roofing them on the day of their wedding just so they could say the words. Even the Marthas, they would hide sharp objects and bathroom cleaners so she wouldn't herself, considering how it would affect them. Hannah slowly realized that the choice was never hers. She had more than cold feet. She had cold body. She could feel herself becoming a corpse. So she made a choice and chose Commander Judd. In the next chapter, we learn how she gets out of it. Aunt Lydia actually keeps her promise to June to keep Hannah safe in Gilead. Chapter 37. Hannah's wedding day was a week away. Hannah started to fantasize about escaping, but couldn't literally escape. Where would she escape? Hannah didn't know anywhere outside of her own neighborhood. All girls were forbidden from learning geography. For all she knew, the world could be flat, with Gilead smack dab in the middle. She started to fantasize about other escapes that we can make within ourselves, until Aunt Lydia showed her a way out. The only way a daughter doesn't become a wife is if she has a higher calling to become an aunt. She needed to make a show, and she gave them exactly that. She snuck past her parents, her martyrs, and even manipulated her driver, pulling rank on him to take her to her old school. She found her old aunt teacher. Following every instruction that Aunt Lydia gave her, she put on a show. She said that she had a higher calling, that her God-given gift was to become an aunt, not a wife, and that if they forced her, she would either herself or her husband. And it's usually not this easy. They will mentally torture a girl, forcing her to stay up for 24 hours repenting in order to torture her into changing her mind. But Hannah was stronger than that, and Aunt Lydia was looking out for her. In order to train Hannah to become an aunt, she was escorted to the only place in Gilead where no men are allowed, where all the aunts live, Ardua Hall. Chapter 38. Ironically enough, Ardua Hall is based on Harvard University campus. After Gilead raided all the universities, they still used their buildings to be the pinpoint of the Femisphere. The best part is that there's no men allowed. When Aunt Lydia was first recruited to build the Femisphere, she leaned into their misogyny and she negotiated a full segregation. Men were not allowed in Ardua Hall except for in emergencies only. The aunts were allowed to lead the Femisphere without any help of uncles. There was always a man at the top that had the final say, but all the work and all the blame went to the aunt. Commander Judd compared Aunt Lydia to Eve from the Bible, telling her that the weight of womankind rests on her shoulders. If she fails, generations and generations of women will continue to suffer the consequences for it. So when Hannah first steps foot in Ardua Hall, it's the first time she truly felt safe from men. And she comes face to face with the most forbidden, dangerous object in Gilead to women. A book. In chapter 39, Hannah reads for the first time. Follow along in the book club. In Gilead, it was illegal for all girls and women to read unless they were aunts, and Hannah just started her training to become one. We're in chapter 39. Hannah was raised in Gilead to believe that reading led to the poisoning of women's minds. They raised these girls to be intellectually dependent on men. They were taught that books were filled with forbidden knowledge that only men and highly trained aunts could decipher. Instead of reading and writing, they were taught wifely hobbies like needlepoint, gardening, painting. Reading was extremely illegal. First offense, they amputated a finger. Second offense was 2. Third offense was the whole hand. Put a finger down if you wrote a book you can't read. It was so illegal that girls were banned from cemeteries out of fear that tombstones would encourage reading. So when Hannah saw her first book, she was scared of it. What was so dangerous about this thing? Her first book was the Aunt Rule book. The only thing these girls were allowed to read was more Gilead propaganda. And up until this point, she was essentially illiterate. So at age 13, Hannah opened a book for the first time. She describes the words on the page like tiny black insects, hold secret sounds and messages. After being preached from the Gilead Edition Bible all her life, it wouldn't be until Hannah graduates into an aunt that she finally gets to read the unaltered version, the original Bible. But she's not in yet. In the next chapter, she has to pass 3 interviews with the founding aunts. Follow along in the book club. Hannah has to interview with the 4 founding aunts of Gilead in order to become an aunt herself. Chapter 40. The first aunt is Aunt Vidala, the true Gilead believer from the beginning. She never had to go to the think tank because she helped the sons of Jacob take over the country. And just like Serena, she thought loyalty would gain her power in this new world. Instead, she was blindsided when they gave that power to Aunt Lydia because of Aunt Lydia's experience as a judge. While Aunt Lydia had all the aunt power to handle the laws, Aunt Vidala handled the spiritual side, aka twisting and redacting words from the Bible to fit into Gilead's twisted agenda. In order for Hannah to pass her test, Hannah said she hoped to be half as a shining sanctified star as she was, not anyone else's, aka her arch enemy Aunt Lydia. Passing the next 2 interviews with Aunt Helena and Elizabeth was much easier. Aunt Helena just listened to whatever Aunt Lydia told her to do, and Aunt Elizabeth just needed to feel like you were in it for the greater good. That's how she rationalized all her cruel actions, and it's all she respects. The last interview was with Aunt Lydia herself, who was looking out for her all along. She passed the test, but now she has to study for 9 whole years before she is trusted to be a pearl girl and leave the country. That's her only way out of here. Gilead had 2 types of rebels, the fox or the cat. Which one are you? Chapter 41. The fox and the cat both face the same enemy, wolves, but they both approach it differently. The fox has a lot of tricks up their sleeves, like smuggling Gilead kids out the country or planning an attack against the commanders. They were good tricks, but when the fox ran out of tricks, they got caught. But the cat has one trick: to hide in plain sight. Nick is a cat. Nick wasn't willing to make these big grand acts that might compromise his identity. Instead, he sat back like a cat in a tree and watched the drama unfold, while the foxes faced the real consequences. Aunt Lydia claims to be both fox and cat. Most of the time she was in cat mode. When the time was right, she would get another fox to play her trick for her. Do you remember the creepy dentist from chapter 17 that diddled Hannah and a bunch of other girls in Gilead? Aunt Lydia spent years eavesdropping to collect evidence against him, but it wasn't enough. He was too powerful. They would forgive the man and accuse the girl of lying. So acting as both fox and cat, she sent Aunt Helena to the same creepy dentist and set him up. The aunt ripped off all her clothes and accused the dentist of raping her. Since aunts were highly protected from men, the dentist was immediately sentenced to a prosecution. The handmaids all line up and just start blah, blah, blah. Even though he didn't really touch the aunt, he touched a bunch of other Gilead girls. So just Aunt Lydia made sure no one got away with it, while she sat back hands clean. You either protected yourself for the greater good or come out swinging with all your tricks. Are you a fox or a cat? I mean, what kind of country would support a theocratic regime committing a genocide against its own citizens? We're in chapters 42 to 44. Gilead cut off citizens from the rest of the world so that they can control the narrative. They used Pearl Girl missionaries to spread propaganda and prey on vulnerable groups, homeless people, sex workers, infertile families, and they fed them a bunch of false promises, conveniently leaving out the part where their economy rests on slave labor, in true American fashion. And it worked. Gilead gave these people hope. People helped the Pearl Girls traffic women into Gilead, and some women even volunteered to be there. You would think that they would listen to the handmaids that managed to escape, but even when June gave her full testimony to the court, Gilead still had supporters. Many of them weren't believed. They never believed women. They thought the handmaids must be telling a tall tale, hence the title, A Handmaid's Tale. Good thing it's just a show, right? Just fiction. Totally fiction. Actually, yes. Some women from neighboring countries volunteered to immigrate into Gilead. It was the final step for a girl to become an aunt, the Pearl Girls ceremony. Pearl Girls were Gilead's missionaries that went to neighboring countries to spread the Giladian dream, the Holy Land where every woman gets a house and a husband. But really, they were trafficking pearls, aka potentially fertile girls. The ceremony itself feels eerily similar to a matrimonial ceremony. The Pearl Girls marched their pearls down the aisle into the chapel, and they're all singing, "Bring in the pearls, bring in the pearls." The new recruits have to kneel down before the newly graduated aunts and pledge their allegiance to the Giladian flag. But there was no guarantee that a pearl would become a wife. If you couldn't conform to Gilead society or didn't look the part, your Giladian dream would become a Giladian nightmare. You would be reclassified as a handmaid. Most of the pearls were homeless, DV victims, or other vulnerable communities. Lily was deluded into believing that she had a better life as Off Glen than she ever had as Lily. They were indoctrinated to believe that Gilead was a dream come true. Aunt Lydia makes it her mission to get revenge on all Gilead men. We're in chapter 46. Before Aunt Lydia was a teacher, she was a judge. At first, she tries to do things the legal way, but as we know, the law was always forgiving to violent men and violent to forgiving women. So when the system failed the girls, Aunt Lydia got revenge. And Dr. Grove, Gilead's dentist, was a crack in the system. Dr. Grove was an econo person, but because he serviced the smiles of so many different commanders, he was able to rise in status. With new status came new power to hold over women. You see, Dr. Grove SA'd multiple young girls in his dentist office, including his own daughter, to prepare them for marriage. And because purity was so valued amongst those young girls, and he had so much power, no young girl took the risk of aborting him. No one believed a girl, but they would believe an aunt. So Aunt Lydia set him up with the perfect crime. She convinced another aunt to go to Dr. Grove's office, rip off all her clothes, run into the lobby, accusing him of essaying her. And even though he pleaded his innocence, aunts outrank econo person, and he was sentenced to getting his ass beat to death. I don't know, I think justice was served. But it wasn't enough for Aunt Lydia to pick off these men one by one. She wanted to get them all. In the next chapter, she kicks off her plan to take down Gilead once and for all. Read and watch along with me in the Book to Screen Club. Hannah and Nicole grew up in completely different worlds, but they finally meet for the first time in Aunt Lydia's office. We're in chapter 47. After June smuggled Nicole out of Gilead, she was raised in like this Mayday witness protection program so top secret that she didn't even know she was living undercover. Out of sight and kind of out of touch. Only reading about the traumas that happened in Gilead, rather than experiencing any version of oppression herself, gave her a kind of black and white way of thinking. Before she found out that she was baby Nicole, she wrote a whole essay on why she was team deport baby Nicole back to Gilead and got a C+. Meanwhile, Hannah never made it out of Gilead. She spent her first 13 years being groomed to be a child bride, narrowly avoided by pledging to become an aunt, then spent the next 9 years studying so much Gilead propaganda that she truly believed in the unselfish service of the aunts. So when they meet for the first time in Aunt Lydia's office, they couldn't be any more different. Hannah's about 22, Nicole's about 16. But in order for Aunt Lydia's plan to work, she needs both of June's children, both sides of the world, to work together as one, as sisters, to take Gilead down. I know June would be so proud. In Gilead, name changes coincide with status changes. So yes, Hannah's name gets changed twice. Chapter 48. When Gilead kidnapped the handmaid's children, they changed their names to renew them in Gilead's new light. Hannah was changed to Agnes Jemima, not like the syrup. Agnes meant lamb. Jemima was a reference to the story of Job from the Old Testament. For context, Job was put through many trials and tribulations, including losing all of his children, but he always kept his faith. For his resilience, he was blessed with even more children, one of them being named Jemima. So that means Hannah's Gilead mother, Tabitha, equated herself to Job, and she viewed Hannah as her blessing to justify all the pain she inflicted on the world. But whenever Hannah heard this story, it always made her think about how Job's original children could never really be replaced. If any character is being compared to Job, it should probably be Janine. She lost her son, suffered as a handmaid, Jezebel, and unwoman, but kept her faith through it all. In the end, was reunited with her daughter Charlotte. Back to Hannah, who's now Agnes Jemima. Agnes would have become Mrs. Commander Jubb if she didn't play her cards right and pledge to become an aunt. And after 9 years, aunts in training get their new names. They have to choose from a selection of old beauty industry names that used to control women before Gilead did. So Agnes Jemima becomes Aunt Victoria. Yes, like Victoria's secret. And in the next chapter, Aunt Victoria learns all about the secret responsibilities that the aunts hold. Follow along in the book club. Ruby's premarital prep, aka fiance school for Commander's daughter. Hannah's friendship with Becca was the only thing getting her through it. We're in chapter 49. Hannah lost some popularity when the school found out that her real mom was a handmaid instead of the other pure daughters of commanders and wives. Becca was never popular because she was a daughter of an Econo family, kind of like Eden, Nick's first wife. Because her father was an important dentist, she got to go to fiance school, kind of like on scholarship. But the Gilead dream of every girl having a house and a husband was Becca's personal nightmare. So when Becca's family tries to arrange her marriage, she tries to herself in the middle of class, and Hannah never sees her in school again, leaving Hannah all alone. But that determination to reject marriage over her literal dead body inspired Hannah to do the same. Hannah wanted to escape too, but she couldn't do it the same way Becca did. The only way she knew out was to become an aunt. Nearly a year later, Hannah and Becca are reunited in a new school, the Aunt Training Center. There, they go from best friends to soul sisters. Becca doesn't just help teach Hannah how to read. Becca teaches her true media literacy, how to question the text you're being presented, and see Gilead for what it was, from the eyes of an Econo girl. You could believe in God, or you could believe in Gilead, but you can't believe in both. Becca says these words to Hannah during her crisis of faith. We're in chapter 50. The girls of Gilead grew up to believe that church and state were one and the same, so Gilead's law was also the universal law of life. And since women weren't allowed to read the Bible for themselves, there was no room for things like interpretations or personal relationships with God, only blind faith based off of whatever the men showed them. The only class of women allowed to read the original Bible were aunts and aunts in training. When Hannah read the Bible for the first time, instead of the Gilead version that she's been fed all her life, it shatters her world. But instead of rejecting God or spirituality as a whole, she rejected the state that twisted her religion into something oppressive. She began to explore her own personal relationship with faith. And we see this theme of personal faith as a form of protest several times throughout the show. Eden quoting Corinthians and dying for the love she believed in. Or the Econo man that secretly had a prayer rug in Quran. Or like when June set up this private vigil in that old building. And then the show juxtaposes this against characters like Serena that rejected the idea of a private vigil in exchange for a funeral rooted in performative religious nationalism in order to turn it into some kind of political chess move. Atwood isn't against religion or spirituality, but instead calls out the oppressive forces that manipulate these religions in order to become gods themselves. While training to become an aunt, Hannah starts to uncover all of Gilead's darkest secrets. We're in chapter 51. The aunts secretly collected color-coded blackmail on every citizen of Gilead, except for handmaids and other aunts. Martyrs that were in the network would eavesdrop on their household and sell secrets back to the aunts. And these secrets were messy. Wives were swapping babies with one another. Husbands would falsely accuse their wives of adultery just so that they can get a younger wife. Hannah found out that her stepmother killed her husband and blamed it on the handmaid. None of these stories ever went public to save Gilead's image, but the aunts knew the real truth, and they acted as these all-seeing gods, and vengeance was theirs. The aunts will either hold the information over them and blackmail them into their little puppets, or they just frame them for a crime to end them, like in Dr. Grove's case. Hannah felt both tempted and overwhelmed to have all that power at her fingertips. Could she keep Gilead under her eye, silently judging and punishing how she saw fit? Hannah's ex-fiance, Commander Judd, and his 4 late wives. We're in chapter 52. Since divorce wasn't legal in Gilead, once his wife failed to produce an heir, he would find creative ways for death to do them part. They'd come down with mysterious illnesses like fell down the stairs-itis. Hannah avoided being his 5th victim by pledging to become an aunt, but her childhood best friend Shunammite was not as lucky. Ever since she was a little girl, dreamed of having her own house, husband, and help. But shortly after marrying Commander Judd, she woke up to a nightmare. By the time she was only 18, she had already experienced the pain of giving birth to a stillborn unbaby and was slowly getting poisoned by her husband as punishment for it. Aunt Lydia convinced Commander Judd that he was too suspicious. Let her handle it by sending her to the Calm and Balm Clinic, an all-women clinic that's hidden in the aunt hall. And he's just so eager to run off and marry his next victim, he assumes she's just doing his dirty work for him. It wouldn't be the first time. Follow me to read along in the Book to Screen Club. In Gilead, Thanksgiving was the final ceremony for a girl to become an aunt. We're in chapter 53. Pearl girls are aunts in training that go on missions to foreign countries to recruit a pearl, aka a potentially fertile girl. And kind of like a human sacrifice sacrificed into a volcano, these Pearl Girls lure innocent women into Gilead on Thanksgiving Day. Basically, the Pearls are showing their thankfulness towards Gilead by giving them a new victim. And after all that work it took for June to break Nicole out of Gilead, this Thanksgiving ceremony is how Nicole breaks back in and lets the Pearl Girls recruit her. When she lands in Gilead for the Thanksgiving, there's no feast. Instead, she actually has to spend the night fasting, kneeling down in silent prayer. This was a part of the test, to see which one of these potentially fertile girls could withstand the pressures of Gilead. After a few hours, one of the women starts having a panic attack, obviously regretting their decision coming to Gilead in the first place. She failed the test, and they made her a handmaid. Anyone who could sit down, shut up, and follow the rules were used as the wife, econo-wife, or supplicant. And while the Pearl Girls celebrate their promotion to aunts, the pearls they sacrifice realize there's nothing to be thankful for in Gilead. In Gilead, what you ate depended on your social class. Pregnant handmaids got some of the healthiest foods of Gilead, not because of their status, because fetuses were the most protected class in Gilead, and handmaids were just their glorified incubators. And although aunts had a lot of social power, their lives were dedicated to work, not pleasure. Therefore, their food was only for nutrition, not taste. Things like indiscriminate soup made up of leftovers. Because this is so hard to get used to, aunts in training are encouraged to try junk foods on their mission trips to test temptation, but ultimately reject it for Gilead. Econo people received the barest minimum of food tokens. Meanwhile, the highest commanders got more than enough food and dessert tokens like chocolate and oranges. But this system didn't last as countries stopped trading with Gilead. 15 years later, they became dependent on agricultural colonies that were farmed by unwomen. Precious ingredients like cheese were reserved for the angels on the front lines, while their precious daughters ate vegan cheese. So who really was the most protected class of Gilead? The children or the angels that fought for them? Hannah and Nicole both had to grow up without June or each other, both of them raised by fake families. But the aunts of Gilead secretly kept up with every single bloodline in Gilead, real and fake, in the Bloodline Genealogy Archive. Since the handmaids were getting pregnant by just about anybody to stay alive, doctors, drivers, other commanders, aunts had to work harder than Maury Povich to find out who is the father. On record, Nicole is the daughter of Fred, Offred, and kinda Serena. But in her file, it's known that Nick is the real father. And in Hannah's file, she learns that she never had any blood connection to Gilead, and the only photo she has of June is her handmade mugshot. Even though Hannah and Nicole were raised apart in two completely different worlds, they were definitely their mother's daughters, both conniving and charming all in one. But between Nicole adopting Nick's cutthroat attitude and Hannah adopting Luke's naive but compassionate heart, when these girls first meet, they clash like sisters from different misters. Come back tomorrow for the next chapter. We're finishing the book in 12 days. Mayday uses high-tech spyware to smuggle secrets in and out of Gilead called the microdot. They were these teeny tiny cameras that took eeny-meeny pictures. So small, you need to look through a microscope to read them. Aunt Lydia worked undercover as the source to smuggle secrets to Mayday agents. Using the Pearl Girl missionary trips as the cover, Aunt Lydia would secretly implement secrets into the Pearl Girl flyers and gave them a route to follow. Unknowingly, the Pearl Girls were helping Mayday in every mission trip. In June, would use the microdot to keep up with her daughters. Nicole's Mayday parents would secretly take microdot pictures of Nicole as she grew up throughout the years. June would look at them once and then burn them, so Gilead could never track them back to her. And it's a good thing, because the commanders in Gilead started to catch on to Aunt Lydia's trick, nearly ruining Aunt Lydia's entire plan. So her plan B was to smuggle Nicole back into Gilead, because she's the one person that they want the most but would never hurt. Before smuggling her back into Gilead, Aunt Lydia had Nicole get this tattoo: Love God, and plants the damning evidence against Gilead right in the O with the microdot, because no commander in Gilead would think to look in God, but it's what will ultimately smite them down. What is the testament saying about the meaning of sisterhood? Is it through blood, like Hannah and Nicole, who grew up in completely different worlds but share blood through June? Or is it our chosen sisters like Agnes and Becca, who grew up together in Gilead and are trauma bonded for life? Was blood thicker than Gilead's holy water? I'm not so sure. Becca and Hannah understand each other in a way that Nicole couldn't even imagine. They went to girls' school and then fiance school, and they both narrowly avoided child marriage at age 13 by going to aunt school together. They were both victims of the same man, but their sisterhood with one another is what ultimately saved both of them. They learned how to read together, how to finally think for themselves and become disillusioned to Gilead's dream. But all that comes to an end when Aunt Lydia reveals that Hannah and Nicole are the real sisters. And Becca hears the quiet part out loud. Aunt Lydia's escape plan were only for the blood sisters. When Lydia saved Becca's life, it was only temporary, and now she had to pay her back with the ultimate sacrifice. Becca was the just-in-case collateral damage. As someone who spent most of their life as an only child, I know the pain of finding out your chosen sister has a real sister. Aunt Lydia had 15 years to come up with a plan to take down Gilead, and then came up with the dumbest plan possible: to smuggle June's daughter Nicole back into Gilead. But first, Lydia had her get this tattoo: Love God. Because once she made it in, Aunt Lydia implanted 15 years worth of blackmail into the O. What could go wrong except for literally everything? Lydia had 3 big problems on her hands. Problem number 1, the tattoo in itself. Though it's a red herring to everyone else in Gilead, the tattoo was seen as blasphemous, and some aunts wanted to teach her a lesson. Specifically Aunt Vidala, who happened to be problem number 2, Aunt Lydia's biggest op and Gilead's favorite pick-me. She volunteered to be an aunt since way before Gilead, but of course the commanders didn't care about all that and chose Lydia instead. So she has Vidala lurking around in the background, always trying to catch her slipping. And Aunt Lydia clearly was slipping because problem number 3 was the worst of all. She told Commander Judd, arguably the worst man in Gilead, that Nicole was back in Gilead, and now he wants to marry her in a 60-minute televised special. Lydia, you had 15 years. How is this the best you could do? Hannah spent her entire childhood trapped in Gilead. By the time she gets a chance to escape, yeah, she actually feels a little bit homesick. If Gilead was the devil she knew, then the rest of the world was the devil she didn't. And Hannah didn't know which one she found scarier, the known evil or the unknown. Do you remember how hard it was for the Plain kids to adjust to Canada? From their perspective, it was like going from one prison to another. The outside world didn't assign houses to all their citizens. In fact, if you didn't work for a living, you would end up homeless. A lot of the foods had things like chemicals and pesticides. Kids were handed iPads instead of toys. And yes, Gilead had toys. Scary toys, but toys. I made a video about that too. She may have been escaping with her blood sister Nicole, but she was leaving behind her chosen sister Becca, the sister that helped her get through every day of Gilead. Of course, when you're looking at it from the outside perspective, you would want to burn Gilead down to the ground. But I understand why Hannah didn't. Even if you were raised in a prison, there's no place like home. 12 Days of Testaments, chapter 6-7. Everything in this book is a reference to our history. In this chapter, Hannah and Nicole escaped Gilead on a boat headed to Canada, named the Nellie J. Banks, which is reference to an infamous boat that rum runners used to use during the Prohibition days. The rum runners would anchor the ship about 3 miles away from the shore, just far enough to stay out of state territory. And then they would get their customers to row their boat 3 miles to Nellie J. Banks to purchase their illegal booze. And so Hannah and Nicole basically had to do the same thing to escape. Captain couldn't take them all the way because helping Gilead fugitives could lead to major international conflict. Do you remember how much trouble Moira and all her other shipmates almost got for smuggling June on the ship? Just like in this situation, the captain couldn't risk carrying Gilead's precious cargo. So just like the bootleggers had to do, Hannah and Nicole have to row a teeny tiny boat in the middle of the night in freezing cold Canadian waters. Not to mention Nicole's working with one good arm, because the arm she got the tattoo microdot full of Gilead blackmail definitely has sepsis. That did not seem sanitary. So working with 1.5 girl power, Hannah and Nicole have to row their boat not so gently down Canadian waters. Doesn't rhyme as much. Becca's story reminds me so much of Eden and why Econo women haunt the entire story. Most Econo girls were married off by the time they started menstruating, so basically around the ages of 13 to 15. And because they were issued low-ranking husbands like guardians and angels who couldn't afford the slave labor of handmaids and Marthas, it was up to these 13-year-old girls to do all the cooking, cleaning, and procreating for their low-ranking husbands. 3 times the work for half the price. And age. When Eden tried to escape this life and run home, her own father sold her out, turning her over to Gilead. And Becca's father SA'd her and many other girls in Gilead, including Hannah, to prepare them for marriage. Despite being raised in a country built on pain and lies, They chose love, both romantic and platonic, even if that meant their own demise. Eden jumped into the pool, and Becca jumped into the cistern. Becca describes drowning in almost a spiritual manner, kind of like a baptism, saying that you hear bells and angels singing as you wash Gilead off of you. Because to these Econo-wives, facing death was far easier than facing life in Gilead. They made it. Like mother, like daughter, Nicole smuggles her way in and out of Gilead, holding her sister in one arm and 15 years worth of blackmail implanted into the other one. Chapters 69 through 70. They almost didn't make it out of that ocean. The voice of Becca, the chosen sister that they had to leave in Gilead, guided them to freedom. The girls were airlifted to a refugee hospital, and the Microdot Gilead files were released. Every dark secret to light. Commanders dressing Jezebels like daughters. Wives becoming widows for political power. The unredacted files broke the internet. Hannah and Nicole watch it all unfold on the news as Gilead officials scramble, calling it a Mayday hoax. Sounds familiar. But it's there in that hospital where Hannah and Nicole are finally reunited with June. They don't remember her per se, but they recognize her. Of course, they recognize her face from the mugshot they found in the bloodline file. But it was more than that. Their bodies recognized each other. It reminds me of that skin-to-skin moment that Janine had with Charlotte that ultimately saved her life. When June, Hannah, and Nicole all hug each other and breathe each other in, their scent of each other triggers an unlocked memory, and instantly they all know each other. But what happens now? Now that they're all reunited in Canada and the Gilead files are released, what now? The answer's in the epilogue. Follow along with me, we're nearly at the end. Was Aunt Lydia justified in the end? In this final chapter, Aunt Lydia breaks the fourth wall, speaking directly to the reader. She imagines us asking if the ends, ultimately taking Gilead down, justified the oh so cruel means that she took to get there. But this much is clear. If Aunt Lydia never decided to become an aunt and prove her loyalty through her cruel means, Gilead will still be standing today. She may not be redeemed, but was she justified? She herself acknowledges that she cannot be redeemed in this life, but she hopes that by sacrificing herself to ensure Gilead's downfall could potentially give her name a new light in death, like a phoenix rising from ashes. That beyond death, her story could be seen in a new light in history. Lydia doesn't escape to Canada or turn herself into the Eyes. Instead, at the very last minute before the Eyes arrest her for treason, she administers 2 syringes of morphine to herself. And she leaves it up to us, the reader, to decide if her name would be renewed in a new light or go down in history on Gilead's side. What do you guys think? After going through every single chapter of this book, we're finally at the epilogue. How did Gilead fall? The unredacted Gilead files exposed the commander's darkest secrets to the world. But more importantly, it held the mirror up to themselves. These Gilead files didn't just expose their war crimes. It exposed commanders conspiring against other commanders to rise in power. Realizing that all commanders are bad led to Gilead having a purge that thinned out the elite class so thin that the rest of Gilead had enough manpower to overthrow the government through Mayday and Little America. Happily ever after, right? Well, not quite. Because the epilogue is set in year 2197, hundreds of years past the rise and fall of Gilead. And the truth about what really happened is lost in history. A digital black hole erased most of the world's digital data. And what didn't get erased by this black hole got erased by force. Descendants of Gilead leaders worked extremely hard to destroy servers and any physical evidence that painted Gilead in a negative light. The Handmaid's Tale was reduced to an old wives' tale, and the Testaments were questioned for their credibility as a reliable source of that time. This 13th symposium is the 13th installment of what I can only describe as Gilead Comic-Con. I mean, they literally have a costume contest. And at this symposium, they present different artifacts to try to fill in the gaps of history. This book opens and closes with the statue. But instead of it being Aunt Lydia, the artifact that they found was a statue of Becca, the chosen sister, signed by Hannah, Nicole, the mother, June, both of their fathers, and their respective children and grandchildren that they went on to have. The Handmaid's Tale was still told. I love this book so much. Thank you to everyone who followed along chapter by chapter with me. And for the 12th day of Testaments, I'm doing a giveaway. So many people commented that they didn't have access to the book as my way of saying thank you, giving out 3 box sets of the Testaments and Handmaid's Tale. To enter the giveaway, all you have to do is follow me, repost your favorite chapter recap, and comment 12 days of Testaments.